to a Brawl Network production. This is a podcast for the best fans in the NFL.
Are you in the Mafia?
Am I in the what?
It's time for a Bills Brawl podcast.
Second down and 7, Kelly with the tie. Touchdown! Bill Bush! Allen. Deep shot. Touchdown! On the line to Stephon Diggs. And Sermon breaking tackles at the 22. Inside the 10. Touchdown, Buffalo.
Mike Lindsley back with you. Let's chat some football, Bills Mafia. Get us at Bills Brawl, all a part of the Brawl Network. You can also listen to me on the ML Sports Platter with past guests, including Adrian Wojnarowski, Bob Costas, and Hall of Famers from the world of sports as well. Incredible to bring onto the program. One of the best in the business and doing such an unbelievable job breaking down the upcoming NFL draft, and his latest piece we'll get into a little bit as well. He is a terrific Buffalo Bills insider and beat reporter for The Athletic, Joe Buscaglia on Twitter, at Joe Buscaglia. Joe, this is a real treat for me. How are you, man? You've been doing some awesome work.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you having me on.
So let's start with this. Do you have NFL draft fatigue yet? Do you get NFL draft fatigue year in, year out?
I don't. I'm one of the weird ones, man. Like, this is how I cut my teeth in the media industry.
So more mocks, bring it.
Yeah, I want all the mocks. Like, as you called me, I was literally reading a mock and results from mocks last year. So yeah, growing up, the draft was always my thing. And then when I first started over at WGR Sports Radio 550, that's kind of how I got my foot in the door with my boss. Started to do a lot of draft-related content because we didn't really have anybody that centered on that, and it just kind of took off from there. And so, yeah, the draft has always had a special place in my heart, so no fatigue here. I am forever just trying to figure out what each team is going to do.
I realize that the easy thing to say is, well, the Bills, the two holes right now, right? It's like the corner opposite Trey White and let's say it's an edge rusher. Those are the top two deals. Maybe after that you could say tight end to add more depth, whatever. But the main two, edge rusher and corner opposite Trey White. But isn't because Brandon Beane, the guy he is, the shark he is, what they've done in the draft, where they went last year in a land that was unknown and unpredictable at the beginning of the year. I mean, one win from the Super Bowl, for crying out loud. Where they are right now, isn't everything at number 30 on the table?
Yeah, it should be. I mean, outside of quarterback, I would say that it should be in the conversation. And I know Brandon Beane will say it up and down how he doesn't draft for need early on in the draft, but I do think part of the entire best player available strategy certainly is influenced by team need. And so the way that I kind of look at it is need meets value as opposed to best player available versus need. Because if you're picking, let's say, I don't know, a third round defensive tackle because there's none other left at 30th overall, then you're like, okay, what are you doing here? So it's more of a need meets value thing. I think for this year in particular, those needs that you were talking about, cornerback and defensive end, they're probably going to have good enough values available to them at 30th overall to justify it. I would lump in interior offensive line with that as well. And certainly that way they would come away so they could sit there and tell you, hey, we went best player available, but it's also a need. So it's just kind of a way to kind of talk out of both sides of your mouth, but it's a smart draft strategy as well.
What do you think they'll do at 30?
After listening to Beane discuss a bunch of different draft-related theory on Tuesday, my lean right now is probably an edge rusher because I think there is a drop-off at the position once you get past the first 5, 6, 7 guys. And with cornerback, I do think there are some players that you can get later on because I do think in their defensive system, it is so much easier to find a cornerback later on the draft and make him into a productive starter in the NFL. Now, we know how Tre'Davious White worked out, but you also have Tre'Davious White. So do you necessarily need to spend a first-round resource on a cornerback opposite him? It's something that they wouldn't hesitate doing if the right guy is there, but can you find some depth there at cornerback in the later rounds? And we've seen Beane be a part of staffs that have done it before in Carolina, where they've gotten guys like James Bradbury in the second, third round, Josh Norman on day 3, and there's a few other examples. So I just kind of wonder if maybe edge might be the lean here, because he also talked about looking at number 30 with a long-term approach rather than a short-term. Short-term screams cornerback, because right now they have Epinesa, who they just drafted in the second round at edge. They have Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison under contract, who are, finger quotes, starters. I mean, Hughes is definitely a starter. But once you get past 2021, Hughes and Addison are both up with their contracts. They have the only defensive ends they have under contract in 2022 are Darryl Johnson and A.J. Epinesa. Oh. So I kind of look at this as an opportunity to where the edge rusher market isn't particularly strong up at the top. So there's going to be some guys that have some explosiveness. And Beane even admitted, he thinks there's some guys available in this draft that gives them what they would be looking for. So I look in that Kwity Paye sort of tier. You look at Joe Tryon as someone who I think is a fantastic fit for them. Jalen Phillips, I think, it would be their best fit by and large, but I think he's going to be long gone by that point. But then you're starting to get in that little tier, because once you get past like Tryon, Jason Owe, and Gregory Rousseau, there's a legitimate drop-off in my mind. So I think they might want to strike while the iron's hot for a defensive end, because that's the best place to find an impact player at that position early in the rounds.
The Athletic Buffalo Bills beat man and insider Joe Buscaglia on here with me, Mike Lindsley, on the Bills Brawl. Get Joe on Twitter, a must-follow, at Joe Buscaglia. It's amazing, Joe. Many inside Bills Mafia, the fan base, they wanted the big splash, right? They wanted J.J. Watt. They wanted whomever. And then the Bills start bringing back their own. They bring back the boys. Darrell Williams, Feliciano, Milano, McKenzie. They plug and play with other guys here and there. They get Hawk the punter. They go out and get Breida at running back. On and on it goes. And a lot of the fans were pissed because they didn't get the splash. And yet, by bringing guys back, it's twofold. One, you got them at under market value, and two, actually threefold. Two, they're guys who know what you're doing. You've been together for a long time. And three, it's a situation where you're filling those holes that you went into the offseason needing to fill. You're just doing it with the guys who know your system. Give me, from your angle, from your seat, the biggest positive in bringing everybody back and the biggest negative bringing everybody back.
Well, I think for this year specifically, the biggest positive is the camaraderie aspect, especially a year after the pandemic that completely influenced the salary cap for the 2021 season, to where a lot of these teams that are the Bills' competition didn't exactly have a lot of cap room to do all of the things they wanted to do. They had to go with some turnover. Like, take the Chiefs, for example. The biggest question from fans this year has been, okay, what are you doing to get better than the Chiefs? But are the Chiefs going to be as good as they were last year with a bunch of different positions? Have they changed a bunch of stuff along the offensive line? Definitely. But I think the Bills are trying to, from their seat, are going, okay, well, let's take the approach of bringing everybody back, knowing you have a good baseline of success with that group, and trying to catch the Chiefs from that camaraderie standpoint, and hope that the Chiefs falter with all their new pieces. Not saying it's going to work, but it might. And then there's the second piece of the puzzle, which is the draft, because they've gone on this entire offseason retaining and bringing all these guys back. They still have the ability to get 2 to 3 guys that can either be starters or role players for them in this year's team, which could make all the difference to what they wanted to do and what they want to accomplish. So that's the biggest positive to me. The biggest negative is, okay, what is the level of regression that there could be with this roster? Mm-hmm. Because they basically hit as high as they could in 2020. Josh Allen took this humongous jump, like to the likes of quarterbacks that we haven't seen before, from where he was as a rookie to what he was in his third year. What's his level of regression in 2021? What's the entire offense level of regression once teams start to really try to figure them out? The offensive line wasn't particularly good at running the ball last year. What are they going to do to help become a little bit more of a balanced team when teams start to figure out the passing offense a little bit more? And then defensively, what are you going to do to limit Patrick Mahomes? Because one of their biggest problem areas in both of those games was Mahomes getting out of the pocket and forcing the zone defenders to leave their zone to try and deal with him potentially tucking the ball and running, and then the receivers opening up in the spaces that were previously vacated by the defenders, and the Chiefs getting chunk yards through that way. So it's twofold here. It could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, but probably somewhere between the middle.
Everyone says Bills chasing the Chiefs. Everyone's chasing the Chiefs. Everyone's chasing Mahomes. Everyone's chasing that offense. They're the juggernaut. Okay, fine. That's true. But what team do you think is just below the Bills doing the same exact thing, chasing the Bills while they're at it as well, going into 2021? Is it now the Colts? They get Wentz. Is it the Ravens? Is it a different team? What team is right, kind of right there doing the same thing as Buffalo?
Well, the chic pick right now is the Browns, just based on them having all the salary cap stuff.
Yeah.
But I have my questions about whether or not Baker Mayfield is going to be able to do that consistently for them. Never really been a big Baker guy myself, but he definitely played above expectation in the second half of the season. So I guess we'll see about them, and he's ultimately going to dictate their success. Past them, I would probably say the Ravens, just because they had a weird year, tons of injuries, a slight regression as a thrower from Lamar Jackson that I think he's now motivated to work hard to try and upend that, especially in a year that where he could be setting himself up for a huge contract extension. So the Ravens are the ones, to me, if they get some edge rusher help in the draft, and let's say they keep all of their offensive line intact, that's a big thing that they did this year. They went out and got Kevin Zeitler, who's going to be a good interior lineman for them, where they had some difficulties last year. They want to run the ball. Dobbins looked like he was ready to pop it at the end of last year. So that's the team, to me, that I would kind of look out for, because they have all the pieces. It's just a matter of being a little bit more lucky next year.
When did you feel, Joe, that 2020 was taken off to the point where you could legitimately say, holy crap, this Bills team's like legit. They're a major contender. When did you have a moment, a game?
Yeah, I have to bring up the schedule to make sure I'm not speaking incorrectly. I think the biggest moment for me was probably the Seattle game, but maybe even not even that. I think it might even been the Rams game in the third week. Seattle was a big one because everyone expected Russell Wilson to roll in and just pass all over them because they were giving up tons of yards. And it still did a little bit, but the Bills gave them their best shot. But the Rams game is the one that kind of stands out to me, because the Rams were a good team last year. Jared Goff notwithstanding. They absolutely crushed the Rams in the early portion of that game. But what ended up happening, I'm sure everyone remembers, the Rams came roaring back and took the lead near the end of the game.
29 unanswered, I think it was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Bills teams of old, like those 2 to 3 years before that, they crumbled.
Yeah.
But that was the moment where I'm like, there might be something to this team, because and Allen as well, because that in those moments before in his career, he just let the moment get the best of him. Like, think back to the Texans playoff game, where it just looked like the moment was too big for him. He was making mistakes outside of structure, that pitch play to Dawson Knox, all of that comes flooding back. But in that Rams game, he looked calm. He looked composed. He was moving the defense with his eyes. He was moving the defense with his legs. There was a third and I think 22, 23, something like that. And he rolled out of the pocket just a little bit, just so he could move a couple of Rams zone defenders out of their zones, and it opened up Cole Beasley to kind of dip in, and he threw a perfect strike over the middle of the field on their game-winning touchdown drive, and that is what helped set them up to get down there. So from those moments, that's when it was like, okay, this team's a really good team, but how high can they go? And they answered it.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I said, and they answered it.
Yeah.
Point blank.
And I'll tell you this, I'm with you on the Rams game. That was the moment for me, because when they lost the lead, you started to get something wiggling in your head called same old Bills, that whole thing. And, oh, man, are they going to blow it again? And they didn't. They hung on, and Allen took them down a fourth quarter drive in the final minutes. It was spectacular. I mean, he was making plays, and as you mentioned, that rope, I remember that play. I could see it in my head as you were describing it. And it was terrific. Joe Buscaglia, The Athletic, talking Buffalo Bills. A couple more for you here, Joe, at Joe Buscaglia on Twitter. Just doing some amazing work. Make sure you get The Athletic subscription as well, theathletic.com. Brandon Beane and McDermott, obviously Sean McDermott, they've been known for trusting their guys and staying with their players. And they might give a guy a tough situation like a benching, Zach Moss with a fumble in San Fran. There might be other situations, Taron Johnson, etc., where you kind of have to wait your turn. Neal or Levi Wallace, whatever the case may be. And then something happens with these guys where they've stuck around long enough, learned, understood the back and forth with McDermott and then they make a huge play. And Taron Johnson made the huge interception return in the postseason, and other guys have stepped up. Zach Moss was great in the fourth quarter before he got injured, obviously. He was great in the fourth quarter, wearing down teams towards the end of the year. So I ask you this, going into 2021, with the players the Bills power guys have held on to and feel comfortable with, McDermott and Beane, who's the guy to take the step this year, that they've hung on to and felt confident with?
Yeah, Ed Oliver. That's the easy answer.
That's the guy. They need him, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And I also think he has a little bit of a reputation that isn't fair, just because last year there were a lot of times throughout the season, because they were so light up front and they were struggling to stop the run, that they actually put Ed Oliver at the one technique defensive tackle position, which is not his spot. And that really, I think, hurt his early season progress. It wasn't every single play. They do this thing where if the team motions to a tight end to a different side to make that the strong side, then they'll flip their defensive tackles roles on the play. But it was very interesting that even before all those pre-snap motions happened, Oliver was lining up at one tech a bunch, and that was something I didn't expect them to do, but he had some prior experience doing it in college, lining up over the center and really trying to occupy some blockers. He was probably the best guy that they had without Latulele to do that. But in the second half of the season, when they started to get him back more into his role as a three-technique defensive tackle, I really felt like he started to take off in the second half of the season, just like he did as a rookie. And it's not stuff that shows up in the box scores, like you'll see a flash play every once in a while, but he was whipping offensive linemen out of the way. He was stout up front and disengaging from the blocks. He's got good hand usage. I really think that as long as they have Latulele next to him and have someone that can play that one technique role next to him, that he could flourish this season, especially if they're able to contain quarterbacks in the pocket a lot better than they did last year. So Oliver's the one to me. It might not ever be the 10 sack a year thing that I think some people might have been hoping for, just based on, point blank Aaron Donald, who he was unfairly comped to, just based on size alone. But Oliver's a good player, and I think Oliver can be a great player in this system. I just don't know if he's ever going to be that Donald player that people want him to be. But yeah, I think he's got a jump in him this year.
How about Josh Allen's contract situation? What's next there?
Yeah, if you look at a lot of the contract extensions for quarterbacks that were signed ahead of their fourth season, the majority of them happened between June and July. Some go into September. Sometimes they'll even wait till the end of the season, like Carolina did that with Cam Newton. They waited until before his 5th year to sign him. But the majority of teams sign ahead of the fourth season. So that June to July dead period seems to be the sweet spot because there's really nothing else to think about because you're leading up to training camp.
Yeah.
And that's when you can really focus on the details. But the one thing that's challenging the Bills this year is that they have no idea what the salary cap is going to be next year. And I think that's going to influence their decision-making, his potential cap figure. But what it would help them with is if they were to, because they're definitely going to pick up the 5th-year option before the contract negotiations start up, which is around $23 million for 2022. If they were to negotiate that extension, they could help bring that number down in 2022 and backload the contract to where the cap hits start to come in heavy when there's supposed to be a big jump based on the new TV money and the new streaming money and everything like that. So there's a smart way to go about it. So I think those summer months will probably be the key there.
Joe, let's wrap quickly with this. Why don't you just give the listeners here an idea of what you've been rolling out, at the Athletic. I can't get enough of the content, to some of the draft stuff, the piece that you did with the rookie quarterback window, 5th-year option, all that sort of stuff, and just kind of mocking it up on the draft side on a daily basis. So get into some of that, promote some of your stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've just been heavy on draft stuff. Basically, a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about here. I just posted a piece today talking about, after studying the film, on all of the top interior offensive linemen and who would be the best realistic fit for them based on draft positioning and schematic fit and things like that. I'm going to be having another in-depth mock draft where I try to channel Brandon Beane coming up next week. Going to be having a big debrief, basically unpacking the notebook at some point next week about all of the different ways that things could happen, trading up, trading down, things like that, and really anything you could want. Both Matthew Fairburn, who's my colleague at The Athletic, and myself, we've basically written about every single position at this point. So just head to theathletic.com. You go to theathletic.com/thebuffalobeat. You can get a discounted subscription, and it's a lot of fun. So I highly encourage it.
Yeah, I have the subscription. It's so good, and you guys do a great job. Bill's beat man and insider Joe Buscaglia for The Athletic, doing amazing work at Joe Buscaglia on Twitter. And by the way, should also mention that he and Matthew co-host, Matthew Fairburn, the Buffalo Beat, all over the major platforms for podcasts listening as well. So make sure you download and subscribe and listen to that. Joe, appreciate it so much, bud.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. I appreciate you having me on.